Good afternoon and welcome to our 18th annual exhibit of hydrogen and fuel cell technologies. We've been here since 1995 talking about this innovative technology. It's always interesting to find where the new applications are, what we're doing with this technology, how it's developing, how it's expanding into new markets, and how it's successfully competing with conventional materials, conventional devices. To talk about some of these subjects, I'd like to invite our next guest up on stage. He's Thomas Melczer. He's Director of Business Development and Investor Relations at Proton Motor. Please welcome with me Thomas Melczer. Good afternoon, Thomas.
Thank you, Brian.
So, you know, many people know because you are a big player in this industry, but perhaps you could tell us, nevertheless, a little bit about Proton Motor.
Well, Proton Motor is in the fuel cell business since more than 15 years, which is a long time for our technology. Although the technology is much older than that, but it's a long time. And Proton Motor is primarily focused on the development of fuel cell stacks. So we have our own fuel cells, we develop them and we produce them together with manufacturing partners in Germany. But we also are very committed to complete system offering. So when a customer comes to us and says, I need a complete system for a bus, a truck, vehicle, stationary, we start from the early approach, sales approach, via simulation calculation, via the integration study, up to the complete integration and finalization of the vehicle. So we can do the whole thing.
When we started way back in 1995, there were a lot of purists among us. That is, we thought fuel cells would replace the battery. We wanted to reinvent the car. We weren't really necessarily working in combinations. We often thought of the fuel cell product as the engineer's dream. Are we still in that phase, or are we doing more of hybrids?
Well, I think we learned a lot over the last 10 years. There was a real hype at the beginning of the 2000s, saying up to 2015, 2020, a lot of vehicles will already have a fuel cell. We know it takes more time, but we are on a good way. And I think we have now a more pragmatic view on that technology. We are not saying it only can be a fuel cell or nothing. We say today it will always be a mix of the optimized components for each application. So whatever you need, whatever you have to do with a vehicle or a stationary system, we can then say what is the best mix between fuel cell power, between battery power. Eventually also you use ultra capacitors to store braking energy. And so I would say we learned lessons, not only one lesson, and we improved now the technology, but also we improved the way how to approach the right application and solution for a customer.
What are some of the applications that are successful, even though they're perhaps smaller scale applications? Can you name a few where we're doing well?
Well, I mean, of course, there's a huge market in fuel cells on the stationary power, and this can be backup power, but also today we see more and more issues like grid reserve. So the utility companies have to balance the grid. They have to generate something which can store energy, and that is, of course, hydrogen. And then you need a fuel cell to switch back to electric energy from the hydrogen. In the automotive market, you have with Daimler strong player for passenger vehicles, for buses, and Proton Motor. What we try to approach is the light-duty vehicle market, small buses also, and but we see that especially the inner city logistic or the inner city transport is a very, very interesting issue for us, where we see that, you know, there are political restrictions, there are restrictions in regard to pollution reduction. Especially in Germany, we have quite tough rules now implemented, and we will see more rules coming. So, you know, companies which are dealing with inner city logistic, they are making up their mind, and they already start to buy emission-free. Shall I continue? Or
This is wonderful, yeah.
Because we are, a nice story what we today present here on the exhibition with our a very nice Newton vehicle, which is a joint project with Smith Electric Vehicle, which is a UK and American-based company. And it's interesting, Smith is in the electric vehicle business since more than 80 years. So electric-powered vehicles are not new. And they started with milk delivery vehicles in London, which are well known for people from the UK. But today they do very advanced technology. They do vehicles for light-duty, heavy-duty transport. They are worldwide the number one, and they have already an established business. So they are not starting with a new vehicle. They are selling these vehicles in quantities. And these vehicles today are offered with lithium-ion batteries, of course. Yeah. And well, we had 2 years ago first discussions to implement also a fuel cell in this vehicle to offer to their customer more variety to make the decision. A customer which buys a vehicle from Smith today, he can buy a battery-powered vehicle with a different size of battery packs. And there's a precise technical specification in the back. This can drive so many miles, can support air conditioning or heating. And we said, well, it would be interesting for you, Smith, also to add more options to your customer. So you integrate a small range extender system, which is a fuel cell powered system, and that gives you much more energy on board. You can have more distance. You can have a real air-conditioned system on board, which is also capable to survive in Arizona or in California. You have the heating easier because you have improvements on the heating because we have the hot water from the fuel cell which can be used. So it's a lot of things which help Smith also to improve the vehicle. We are not saying take the battery out. We will always have battery, but we will have a clever mix between battery and fuel cell. And this is what we proudly presented today here too when we had a small ceremony on this vehicle, and where we can see that the mix of both, the intelligent mix of both, makes lots of sense.
We do have some photos which we can run up on the screen here of this vehicle, which is in this direction. After our talk, I'm sure we can all visit it together. At the end of this hallway, shortly before the windows, you can see the vehicle there as well.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, we also used electrical vehicles back in Toronto. The milk delivery was with electrical vehicles. They were kind of silent. They just made noises like sewing machines when they accelerated or deaccelerated. They looked kind of heavy. But I hear that drivers of such vehicles often suffered from serious neurosis. It was called a range anxiety. That is, you'd have to worry about if the batteries run out during the day, you really got to get a tow truck to come and get you. So those are one of the issues that you face when you're doing urban delivery. How have we improved over the conventional battery-powered milk truck deliverer or the conventional battery-powered truck, the one that you present here with the addition of a fuel cell? What are the dramatic changes when you add that fuel cell?
Well, of course, clearly increased range of operation is always a big benefit for a vehicle, because if you can operate 120 or 200 kilometers or more, it's a big difference. Also, when you have a pure battery, you might have issues when you drive in winter or you drive in summer. In summer you need air conditioning, in winter you need heating. And but again, for some or many applications, the amount of battery power is fine. You don't need more. But there is, on the other side also, there are a lot of applications where you need more energy. And then up to now, you couldn't use the vehicle because it couldn't fulfill the requirement of the specification. So what we can offer now is simply by saying, well, you have more energy on board. The customer can choose between a mix of batteries and a mix of fuel cells and can make his decision. And this is based on the requirements of the daily use of the vehicle. So if you have a vehicle in the Los Angeles region which has to run 200 kilometers at least and needs driver cabin air conditioning or maybe cooling on the back, you will need more power than you have in the batteries today. If you run a vehicle only 60 kilometers a day, then it's fine. The battery is okay. So it's really a decision which is based on the requirement from the customer. And customers in the logistic market, they know exactly what the vehicle has to do and what it doesn't have to do. And we will have these discussions, and then, well, we are not selling the vehicle as Proton. The vehicle is sold by Smith, but the Smith sales team has now the option to say, well, here we have a list of different sizes of batteries, but we also can offer now the fuel cell as an energy source in the vehicle. And that makes the selling life for Smith, I'm sure, much more convenient and easier. And also it helps on the acceptance of the vehicles, because if you imagine you are a logistic driver and you have some problems when your battery gets empty and you're not back to base, it's not a nice experience. So that's why you made your joke. So it's fully understood. And depending on the size of the range extender, we can have less or more fuel cell power on board. You can bring the battery capacity down to a minimum of 20 kilowatt hours, which is not very much. And that is also the question of the investment, what are the costs and what is the cost mix between the battery and the fuel cell. But at least you have options, and that's always good. You can decide if the customer has already hydrogen infrastructure, or if he says, well, I have no problem to install a hydrogen fueling station on my premises, then he can use it, and then he can drive the vehicle with a larger. We have two systems here for that vehicle. We have a 7 kilowatt and a 20 kilowatt. With a 20 kilowatt one-stack fuel cell system, you can run the vehicle in a full hybrid mode. That means you don't have to recharge the battery. The battery will always stay on a nice SOFC, and so you can run two-shift operation if you want. You just have to refuel the hydrogen. It's like a standard gasoline engine. Yeah.
And how long does refueling take?
5 minutes. It takes 5 minutes, so
Okay.
it's no problem. Yeah.
I always make the comparison with batteries, of course. One of the ways this technology has found a market is indoor material handling. There, I think it's interesting to raise the issue of payback. Of course, these vehicles can be more expensive than the conventional battery-driven forklifts, to take one example. But what are the savings? If you have a forklift and batteries, do you need a series of batteries if you operate in 24-hour shifts? Do you save in weight, for example, when you shift from pure batteries to a hybrid mixture of battery? And so what are the differences in terms of, let's say, 24-hour functionality when you consider a hybrid as opposed to a battery system?
Well, I mean, for a forklift truck, it's quite simple. If you just use a battery version, you need 2 or 3 battery packs which you change. So you need people who handle the heavy battery packs.
These are like this big, aren't
yes,
they?
they're trunks. So and they need to be charged. It's work. But of course it's an old technology. It's many are used to it. But of course, a hydrogen-powered forklift today, you just refill the tank and that's it. So it's you see a lot of benefits, especially when you have multi-shift operation. But I think the point is, in general, if you use hydrogen technology, it's something which, for us, it's a little bit difficult to, to foresee, and that is the price of the hydrogen. Yeah. If you imagine 1 kilo of hydrogen has an energy content of 3.5 liter of diesel, and 3.5 liter of diesel today you pay at least €5 at the fueling station. Yeah, in Germany it's 150, so times 3.5, it's 5 to 6 euros. And 1 kilo hydrogen, you have a very high range of pricing for that. It depends, are you close to a hydrogen manufacturing site, chemical factory, or you are close to electrolyzers, or you produce a hydrogen in the future from wind and solar power and store it. That is something which will be interesting to see where the price goes. We have today a range from 2 to 6, 7 euros. Yeah? You can get in some regions in Cologne, you get the hydrogen for free. Yeah, and so it's when you calculate TCO for such a vehicle, a very large determiner is the price for the hydrogen. It's not so much the hardware. The hardware, when you compare with prices for lithium-ion batteries, and when you see the energy content you have on board with a hydrogen fuel cell system, for example, the 7 kilowatt now, 8-hour shift operation, 7 times 8, you have 56 kilowatt of energy on board. When you put this into lithium-ion batteries, it has a nice price tag. That is not cheap, yeah. And also you have the weight. So it really depends on what you want to do with the vehicle, how much battery, how much fuel cell you need. What is then the consumption, depending on do you drive 300 or 200 kilometers with a vehicle. But I think for our, especially for our industry and for our technology, it is very, very important to get, good prices also for the hydrogen. Yeah.
This is, of course, a larger issue that the community, the fuel cell community, can't solve on its own, but there are a number of ways of looking at it. When you have a fleet of buses operating, it's worthwhile to invest in a bit of infrastructure. We have Whistler in Vancouver, which has the world's largest fleet of buses operating, and there, already you simply concede to the necessity of setting up an infrastructure, and then it becomes less expensive. When is something like that going to happen here? There's another option that they use in China right now. The grid, of course, likes to supply a constant quantity of electrical energy, particularly the nuclear power plants. The Chinese have already started to use every watt extra that they produce in certain areas to produce hydrogen because they can store it. Electricity is notoriously difficult to store, and the quantity of batteries you need would make it impossible. But they've started doing this already. We in Germany could do the same thing. So is there going to be some sort of chain reaction between optimizing our use of the energy are produced and also when you get a fleet of vehicles, creating an infrastructure which will make it really affordable to use hydrogen?
Yeah. Well, I think in general the problem with our grid will grow. Or problems with our grid will grow because we have more and more wind power, solar power. To manage the grid will be more and more difficult, and central and decentralized energy storage will be a very, very important issue for the future for all industrial nations, for China, for Germany, United States, everywhere. And you can store the power in batteries or in hydrogen. Hydrogen makes more sense because you can store it, you can use it then for stationary power, you can use it for mobile power. So I believe at the end we will see a mix. We will see some based on battery. For example, in your private home, you might have a small battery storage system. For larger systems like wind turbines, you might have in addition electrolyzers plus hydrogen storage and then a distribution via hydrogen gasoline stations or hydrogen gas stations or via pipelines. So we will see a big change in that. But I think hydrogen for the future will be one of the main resources to provide our daily energy demand. I'm absolutely sure, because you can't do everything only with batteries. You can't do everything only with hydrogen. You will see the mix, the good mix, a clever solution. And I think for us as Proton Motor, well, we will have a fantastic future. There's no doubt, because whatever we do, it's required. Stationary power we have mobile, we have vehicles, light-duty vehicles, we have ship systems, and what we don't do is passenger vehicles, because there the big companies are, they have the lead. But specifically on the light-duty market, logistic market, that is for us very interesting.
Thomas, we have time for a question from the audience. If there is any question, just raise your hand and we'll address it. I certainly have one last comment. That was almost a wonderful summation of what we've been talking about here. The future looks good. But one of the ways I look at that bright future is by looking at the dirty present. I live in Berlin. And already, according to European law, what the Germans call Feinstaub, that is the pollution particularly from diesel vehicles delivering things within the tight-knit urban infrastructure of Berlin, the emissions are so high that theoretically, according to European law, they would have to declare this day a day where diesel vehicles should not be driven in various areas in the city, particularly with high traffic. So, I suppose the last question is, in view of that, do you think that such emission controls are going to force the development of hydrogen fuel cells?
Yes.
Do you see that as an aid?
Yes, of course, it's very helpful for us. And it's of course very helpful for the inhabitants of the city, because when you have children, I live in the center of Munich, and I have every day at least 5 to 6 logistic vehicle parking in front of my house, and they all come with diesel engine. This will be a big change, and we have to. And I think European Commission puts lots of pressure now, because up to now, Germany, and I'm sure also in the other countries, they haven't fulfilled yet the requirements. So this will be always helpful for industry if we get support via legislation. And this is also doesn't costing any money, you know, it's not expense for the government or for the taxpayer. But we can say, and that is, we had today also a nice speech from Robin Mackey from Smith Electric Vehicles. He is the CTO. And he said that from their point of view, there are already a lot of big companies which have a strong commitment to the environment, which start to go electric, like Coca-Cola, DHL in the US and others. And maybe the US market here is a little bit more advanced than in Germany. Smith is selling a lot of those vehicles in the US market. We also try, of course, then to sell also as an option our range extender to these customers. But you see, beside the legislation, also the big players in this business, they already start to change their mind and say, you know, we have to be more sensitive here, and we want to use vehicles with low emission or with no emission. I think we are on a good way, and that will help us a lot to implement this new technology. But every kind of support from the governments is always welcomed. Yeah.
Well, ever since talking to you, I've been breathing somewhat easier in my residential perspective of Berlin. Thomas Melczer, Director of Business Development and Investor Relations at Proton Motor. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope we'll see you back here next year.
Thank you, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. We'll be continuing in exactly 30 seconds. Dr. Hans-Peter Schmidt from VSWS Reformer GmbH will be talking about gas to power and flux technology. Have a seat, have a drink, and we'll be back in 1 minute.